The stagecoach rattled violently as it made its way down the dusty trail toward Pioche, Nevada in the summer of 1878. Inside, Pearl Davis clutched her swollen belly, wincing with each bump and jolt. 8 months pregnant and traveling across the country to marry a man she'd never met, she questioned her sanity daily. But what choice did she have? When Thomas died in that mining accident, he left her with nothing but memories, mounting debts, and the child growing inside her. "Not much farther now, madam," the driver called down. "Pioche coming up in about 20 minutes. Pearl nodded weakly, trying to steady her breathing. The letter in her reticule felt heavy, the correspondence from one Flint Dawson, cattle rancher outside Pioche. His ad in the Marriage Gazette had been straightforward. Rancher seeks bride. Must be hardworking, God-fearing, and willing to help build a life. Accommodations modest but improving. She had been honest in her reply about everything except her condition. How could she tell him? By the time they exchanged enough letters to agree to the arrangement, she was already showing. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Her plan was simple: arrive, explain her situation, and if he sent her away, well, she would figure something out. She always did. The coach slowed as they approached the main street of Pioche. Pearl glanced out the window at the frontier mining town. A single wide dirt road lined with wooden buildings, saloons, a general store, a small hotel, and other establishments necessary for a town that had sprung up to serve the silver mines. Men in dusty clothes moved about their business, while a few women in practical dresses hurried along the boardwalks. "Pioche," called the driver as the coach lurched to a stop. All out for Pioche, Pearl gathered her single carpetbag, the sum total of her worldly possessions, and accepted the driver's hand as she carefully descended from the coach. Standing on shaky legs, she adjusted her dress, which did little to hide her condition despite her best efforts. The driver eyed her belly, then looked away quickly. "Someone meeting you, madam?" "Yes," Pearl said, though she wasn't entirely sure. Her last letter had informed Flint Dawson of her arrival date, but what if he didn't come? What if Miss Davis? Pearl turned to see a tall man approaching from across the street. He wore a practical canvas jacket over a work shirt, denim pants, and well-worn boots. A wide, brimmed hat shaded eyes that were startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin. His expression was unreadable as his gaze moved from her face to her pregnant belly and back again. Pearl swallowed hard. "Mr. Dawson," he nodded once, coming to stand before her. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 or so, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and creases at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun. Pearl began, her carefully rehearsed explanation dying on her lips. "I should have told you." Flint Dawson's gaze moved from her face to her stomach once more, and for a moment there was only the sound of horses and distant piano music from the saloon down the street. Around them, several onlookers had paused to watch the drama unfold, a clearly pregnant woman meeting a man who was clearly surprised to see her condition. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "That's quite a surprise you're bringing with you, Miss Davis." Pearl's chin came up. "I understand if you want to call off our arrangement. I'll find my way. How far along?" He interrupted. 8 months, she answered, hands protectively cradling her belly. Flint Dawson looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Pearl hadn't expected. He reached for her carpetbag. "My wagon's over there. Can you walk or do you need help?" Pearl blinked. "I can walk. But Mr. Dawson, I don't think you understand." "I understand just fine," he said, turning toward a wagon hitched near the general store. "You're carrying a child that ain't mine, that about the size of it." "Yes," Pearl admitted. "My husband, he died in a mining accident 5 months ago." Flint paused, then gave a single nod. "I'm sorry for your loss." Pearl stared at him. "You're not sending me back?" For the first time, a hint of something crossed Flint Dawson's face, perhaps the ghost of a smile. "Miss Davis, I advertised for a wife because I need one. My ranch is growing and I can't manage it all alone. Your circumstances have changed some things, but not that need." He glanced at her belly. "When's the little one due?" "About a month," she whispered. He nodded again. Then we best get you settled. He held out his hand to help her into the wagon. One more thing, Miss Davis. Yes, his eyes met hers steadily. That child you're carrying, I'll raise him as my own. You have my word on that. Pearl felt tears prick behind her eyes as she placed her hand in his. It might be a girl, she said softly. This time, Flint Dawson's smile was unmistakable if small. Then I'll raise her as my own. Makes no difference to me. The journey to Flint's ranch took nearly 2 hours. Pearl tried to stay alert, to take in the landscape that would be her new home, but exhaustion from the long journey was catching up to her. The wagon bounced over the rutted trail and she gripped the wooden seat tightly. Not much farther, Flint said, noticing her discomfort. Ranch is up ahead in that valley. Pearl followed his gesture and saw a modest spread nestled in a green valley between 2 low hills. A small but sturdy-looking cabin stood near a barn and corral. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, she could make out cattle grazing. It's not much yet, Flint said, almost apologetically. Been building it up for 4 years now, started with 20 head of cattle and now have over 100. It looks wonderful, Pearl said sincerely. Flint gave her a sidelong glance. Town life might be what you're used to, no, Pearl interrupted. I grew up on a small farm in Pennsylvania. This feels familiar. Something in Flint's posture relaxed slightly at that. As they pulled up to the cabin, Pearl could see it was well-maintained if simple. Flint helped her down from the wagon with careful hands. I'll show you inside, then tend to the horses, he said, carrying her carpet bag to the door. The cabin was clean and orderly, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and some basic furniture including a rocking chair. A curtained doorway led to what Pearl assumed was the bedroom. It's very nice, she said, looking around. Bedroom's through there, Flint said, gesturing to the curtain. I'll be sleeping in the barn until we can arrange the wedding. Pastor Wilson comes through every other Sunday. He'll be here 3 days from now. Pearl turned to face him. Mr. Dawson, Flint, he corrected. Flint, she amended. I appreciate your understanding about my situation, but I need to know why. Most men would have put me straight back on that stage. Flint set her bag down and removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Miss Davis, Pearl, she offered. Pearl, he said, the name sounding different in his deep voice. I lost my parents when I was 12, had no other family to speak of, grew up being passed from ranch to ranch, working for my keep, know what it's like to have nowhere to go. His eyes flickered to her belly. That child deserves a chance, as do you. The simple honesty in his words touched something in Pearl. Thank you, she whispered. Flint nodded once, then replaced his hat. Rest now, I'll bring in some supper later. That first evening established a pattern for the days that followed. Flint was unfailingly polite but reserved. He worked from dawn until dusk, coming in only for meals, which they ate together at the table. Their conversation was limited to practical matters: the running of the ranch, preparations for the baby, arrangements for the wedding. Pearl spent those days settling in, organizing the cabin and resting when her body demanded it. She found Flint had stocked the pantry well, and she took pleasure in preparing proper meals. The third night, when she served him a beef stew with fresh baked bread, she caught him looking at her with something like wonder before he quickly lowered his gaze to his plate. This is real good, he said quietly. Thank you. I enjoy cooking when I have decent ingredients, Pearl replied. My husband, she stopped herself, uncertain if speaking of Thomas was appropriate. Flint looked up. Go on, Pearl hesitated. Thomas, my late husband, was a mining engineer. We never had much, but he always made sure I had what I needed for the kitchen. Flint nodded. What happened in the mine? Pearl sighed. Cave in. 8 men were lost, Thomas among them. Her hand went to her belly. I found out I was expecting the week before. He never knew he was going to be a father. Flint was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Thank you, Pearl said softly. Then, feeling bold, she asked, Have you ever been married before? Flint shook his head. No, never found the time, I suppose, or the right woman. A slight flush colored his cheeks, Been too busy building this place. You've done well, Pearl observed. The ranch is impressive for just 4 years' work. Something like pride crossed Flint's face. Thank you. Still a lot to do, though. On Sunday morning, Pastor Wilson arrived as promised. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Pearl had worried about his reaction to her condition, but he showed no judgment. The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing 2 souls together, he said simply. Are you both certain about this union? Yes, Flint said firmly. Pearl looked at the tall rancher who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Yes, she echoed. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the main room of the cabin with only the pastor's wife as witness. When Pastor Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Flint hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on Pearl's lips. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. That night, despite Pearl's protests that she could sleep on a pallet in the main room, Flint insisted she take the bedroom while he continued to sleep in the barn. You need proper rest, he said firmly. I'll be fine where I am until after the baby comes. The arrangement lasted exactly 1 week. In the early hours of the following Sunday, Pearl woke to sharp pains that could only mean one thing: the baby was coming, and early. She managed to make it to the door of the cabin, calling out Flint's name into the pre-dawn darkness. To her relief, he appeared almost immediately, emerging from the barn where he'd been sleeping. Pearl, he called, then saw her clutching the doorframe. What is it? The baby, she gasped as another contraction seized her. It's coming. Flint's eyes widened, but he wasted no time in indecision. He swept her into his arms with surprising gentleness and carried her back to the bed. I'll fetch Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring ranch. She's helped deliver most of the babies around here. Pearl nodded through the pain, and Flint was gone, running toward the stable. She heard the thunder of hoofbeats as he galloped away. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear for Pearl. Flint returned with Mrs. Peterson, a sturdy woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense attitude. She took charge immediately, sending Flint to boil water and tear sheets for bandages. First babies often take their time, Mrs. Peterson assured Pearl, but everything looks to be progressing normally. Outside the bedroom, Flint paced like a caged animal. Occasionally Pearl would cry out and he would stop, his face a mask of concern. Once, when Mrs. Peterson emerged to get more hot water, he caught her arm. She's going to be all right, he asked, his voice rough with worry. Mrs. Peterson studied him for a moment. You care for her already. It wasn't a question, but Flint answered anyway. She's my wife. The older woman smiled knowingly. She's strong, your Pearl, and the baby seems positioned well. They should both come through just fine. As the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows, Pearl's labor intensified. Mrs. Peterson allowed Flint to enter the room, guiding him to sit behind Pearl, supporting her as she pushed. You're doing well, he murmured against her hair, his strong arms bracing her. You can do this, Pearl. His presence gave her strength, and with one final, tremendous effort, Pearl brought her child into the world. It's a boy. Mrs. Peterson announced triumphantly, cleaning the squalling infant quickly before placing him on Pearl's chest. Pearl looked down at her son in wonder, red-faced and angry at his abrupt entrance into the world, but perfect in every way. Thomas, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Thomas Flint Davis Dawson. She felt Flint go very still behind her. Turning her head slightly, she could see the emotion in his eyes as he looked at the child bearing his name. You sure? He asked quietly. Pearl nodded. He needs a father's name, and you, her voice broke, you've given him a father, Mrs. Peterson tactfully busied herself with cleaning up, giving the new family a moment of privacy. Flint reached a tentative finger to stroke the baby's cheek. Hello, Thomas, he said softly. Welcome home. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment for all 3 of them. Pearl recovered quickly from the birth, but caring for a newborn was exhausting. Flint moved back into the cabin, making a bed for himself in the main room. He took to fatherhood with surprising ease, often taking the baby from Pearl's arms when he returned from his work so she could rest. One evening, about 3 weeks after Thomas's birth, Pearl found Flint sitting in the rocking chair, the baby asleep on his chest. The sight stirred something in her heart. "He likes you," she said softly. Flint looked up, a rare smile crossing his face. Hard not to like him back. He studied the sleeping infant. "Got your eyes, I think." Pearl moved closer, looking down at her son. "Maybe still too early to tell, really." She hesitated. "Flint, I've been thinking." He looked up at her, waiting. "This arrangement between us," she continued. "It's not what you expected when you sent for a bride." Flint's expression grew serious. "Do you regret coming here?" "No," Pearl said quickly. "Not at all. You've been more than kind, but I feel I've cheated you somehow. You wanted a wife, and instead you got a ready-made family with all its complications." Flint was quiet for a long moment, his hand gently patting Thomas's back. Finally, he looked up at Pearl, his blue eyes intent. "I sent for a bride because I was lonely, because this place needed a woman's touch. Because I want children someday." He glanced down at the baby. "Seems to me I got exactly what I wanted, just not in the order I expected." Pearl felt tears welling in her eyes. "You've been so good to us." "It's not charity, Pearl," Flint said, his voice low and serious. "I know we didn't start this in the usual way, but I'm starting to think that maybe, in time." He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the words. Pearl took a step closer, suddenly very aware of the man before her, his strength, his kindness, the gentle way he held her son. "In time," she finished for him, "we might find ourselves truly husband and wife, in all ways." The look Flint gave her made her breath catch. "If you could see your way to that, yes." Pearl reached out, touching his cheek. "I think I'd like that very much." The change in their relationship was gradual but unmistakable. Small touches, lingering glances, conversations that stretched late into the evening after Thomas was asleep. One night, as they sat before the fire, Flint told Pearl about his childhood losing his parents to fever, being raised by a succession of ranchers who saw him as cheap labor rather than a child in need. "That's why," he said, staring into the flames, "when I saw you standing there in Pioche, I couldn't turn you away. Couldn't do that to a child." Pearl reached for his hand. "You're a good man, Flint Dawson," his fingers intertwined with hers. "I'm trying to be." As Thomas grew through his first months of life, so too did the connection between Pearl and Flint. Their first real kiss happened on a crisp autumn evening as they stood on the porch watching the sunset. Flint had just returned from delivering cattle to a buyer in Pioche, and the relief in Pearl's eyes when she saw him ride up told him everything he needed to know. "I missed you," she admitted as they stood side by side. Flint turned to her, his eyes searching hers. "I thought about you and Thomas every minute I was gone." When he lowered his head to hers, the kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. Pearl's arms went around his neck as he pulled her closer. "Pearl," he murmured against her lips, "I think I'm falling in love with you." She smiled up at him. "I think I've already fallen for you." That night, for the first time, they shared the bedroom, their lovemaking tender and reverent, the culmination of months of growing affection. Afterward, as Pearl lay in the circle of Flint's arms, she marveled at the strange path that had brought her here. "I was so afraid when I got off that stagecoach," she confessed. "Afraid you'd send me away, afraid of raising Thomas alone, afraid of everything." Flint's arms tightened around her. "I was afraid too," he admitted. "Afraid I wouldn't know how to be a husband or a father." He kissed her forehead. "Still am sometimes." "You're a wonderful father," Pearl assured him. "Thomas adores you." As if on cue, a cry came from the cradle in the corner. Flint rose without hesitation, bringing the fussing baby to Pearl. As she nursed him, Flint watched them both with such tenderness that Pearl's heart swelled. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family of my own." The seasons changed, and Thomas grew from infant to toddler. His first word was "Pa," which made Flint grin for days. He took his first steps across the cabin floor, lunging from Pearl's arms to Flint's outstretched hands. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Pearl started a vegetable garden and kept chickens, while Flint expanded the herd and built a larger barn. They had their challenges. The winter of 1879 was particularly harsh, with snowstorms that isolated the ranch for weeks. A mountain lion took 2 calves in the spring. Flint broke his arm falling from a horse while checking fence lines, leaving Pearl to manage much of the ranch work while caring for Thomas and nursing Flint back to health. Through it all, their bond only strengthened. The foundation of respect that had brought them together blossomed into deep, abiding love. When Pearl discovered she was expecting their second child, the joy on Flint's face mirrored her own. "Another one to love," he said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. Thomas, now nearly 2, was fascinated by the idea of a sibling. "Baby?" he would ask, patting Pearl's growing belly. "Yes, sweetheart," she would answer. "Your brother or sister is in there." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the summer of 1880, Pearl gave birth to a son they named James Samuel Dawson. Unlike Thomas's dramatic early arrival, James came into the world after a relatively easy labor, delivered by the same Mrs. Peterson with Flint once again at Pearl's side. "He looks like you," Pearl said as Flint held his newborn son with practiced ease. Indeed, the baby had Flint's dark hair and strong features. "Poor little fella," Flint joked, but his eyes shone with pride. Thomas approached the bed cautiously, Flint lifting him up to see his brother. "Baby," he said with satisfaction. "That's right, son," Flint confirmed. "Your baby brother." As Pearl watched her husband with their 2 sons, she felt a contentment she had never imagined possible when she'd first arrived in Pioche. This man, this kind, strong, gentle man had taken her and Thomas into his heart without reservation. He had kept his promise to raise Thomas as his own, and no one seeing them together would ever guess the boy wasn't Flint's biological child. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm dictated by seasons and children. Thomas grew into an energetic boy with his mother's curiosity and his adoptive father's love of the land. James followed in his footsteps, the 2 brothers inseparable despite their different beginnings. When Pearl gave birth to their daughter, Emma Rose, in 1882, their family felt complete. Pioche grew as the mines expanded, and occasionally Flint and Pearl would take the children into town for supplies and socializing. People who remembered Pearl's arrival never mentioned the circumstances. To the community, the Dawsons were simply a successful ranching family, respected for their hard work and generosity. On Thomas's 5th birthday, as the family celebrated with a special dinner and the chocolate cake he'd requested, Flint took the boy aside for a talk. Pearl watched from the doorway as her husband knelt to eye level with her firstborn. "Thomas," Flint said seriously, "you know I love you just as much as I love James and Emma, don't you?" Thomas nodded, his expression solemn. "Yes, Pa, good." Flint ruffled the boy's hair. "Because you're my son in every way that matters. The day your mama stepped off that stagecoach with you already in her belly was the luckiest day of my life." Thomas considered this. "Even though I grew in Mama's belly before she met you, especially because of that," Flint said firmly. "It means I got to be your pa right from your very first day in this world." Thomas threw his arms around Flint's neck. "I love you, Pa." Flint held the boy tight, his eyes meeting Pearl's over Thomas's shoulder. The love she saw there made her heart swell. That night, after the children were asleep, Pearl and Flint sat on the porch of their now expanded home, watching the stars appear in the vast Nevada sky. Flint's arm was around her shoulders, keeping her warm against the evening chill. "Did you mean what you said to Thomas?" Pearl asked softly. "That the day I arrived was the luckiest of your life," Flint pulled her closer. "Every word," he confirmed. "I sent for a bride expecting someone who'd help with the ranch, maybe give me children someday. Instead, I got you brave, beautiful, already a mother. Got Thomas too, right from the start." He kissed her temple. "Never could have imagined how full my life would become." Pearl leaned into his embrace. "When I got on that stagecoach, I was so afraid, a widow nearly full term going to marry a stranger." She shook her head at the memory. I thought the best I could hope for was tolerance. And now, Flint asked, turning her face up to his. Now I know what real love is, Pearl said, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, familiar and beloved after 5 years together. Not just between a man and woman, but the love of a father for a child that came to him in an unexpected way. Flint's eyes, still that same startling blue that had first caught her attention in Pioche, were tender as he looked at her. I meant what I promised that day, to raise him as my own. You've done more than that, Pearl said softly. You've loved him as your own. There's a difference. Flint nodded. No difference to me between Thomas and James or Emma. They're all our children. Pearl rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I never thought I'd find this kind of happiness again after Thomas died, especially not with a stranger from a marriage gazette. Flint chuckled, the sound rumbling under her ear. Guess we're not strangers anymore. No, Pearl agreed, smiling up at him. Not strangers at all. As the stars continued to emerge in the darkening sky, Pearl thought about the long journey that had brought her here from desperate young widow to beloved wife and mother. The man beside her had accepted her completely, pregnancy and all, offering a home not just to her, but to the child she carried. In doing so, he had given them both a chance at happiness neither had dared to hope for. Flint Dawson had kept his promise and in keeping it, had built something precious, a family bound not by blood alone, but by choice and love and everyday kindness. The cowboy who had said, "I'll raise him as my own," had done exactly that, and in the process, had given Pearl's heart a home as well.